There are two kinds of mothers in this world, my dear. Those who feel a child quicken in their own womb, and those like me who take in a child the world has cast aside and strive to make them blood of their blood, bone of their bone. We believe, with a faith that borders on foolishness, that love is a poultice that can draw out any poison, that it can mend any break. But I am here to tell you that sometimes love is not enough. And it was that very mother love that nearly cost me my life in my own bed one night. My name is Gertrude Miller, though here in River Creek, Michigan, I'm known to most as Miss G, the woman who took in that boy from the orphanage. I'm 76 years old now, and each line on my face is a sentence from a story. Some tales of joy, others of a pain so profound that not even the relentless march of time could erase it. I still live in this old house on the outskirts of Maple Street, its white paint perpetually peeling, its bones still stubbornly standing against the elements. From my porch, I can see a generous stretch of the Grand River, the blue vein that cuts through the heart of this town. That river has been a silent witness to it all, the joys, the sorrows, and especially that day in 1992 that altered the course of my family forever. That was the year a woman convinced herself that love could save any child, even one carrying wounds so deep, she now believes, not even God himself could have healed them. River Creek isn't a place you'd find on a postcard, but it has its own quiet charm. It's one of those towns where time seems to move with a deliberate slowness, measured in the growth of corn and soybeans in the surrounding fields. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody's business is common currency. The main streets are wide and generous, but here in the older neighborhoods, the lanes narrow, the sidewalks buckle and crack, forcing old folks like me to watch our steps. There's an old stone church, a central square where the old men gather for checkers, and that ever-present river, which, when the rains come too heavy, swells its banks, flooding the lower houses and carrying a little piece of the town away with it each time. It was after the great flood of '88 that my late husband, Joseph, and I decided it was time to grow our family. We had our two biological children, Paul, who was 17 then, and Margaret, 15. But I've always had a heart with too much room, you see. I always yearned for more. It was Margaret who planted the seed. She'd gone to the St. Clair Children's Home on the other side of town for a school project and returned with eyes red raw from crying. "Mama, you should see them. Some have been there for years. Nobody wants them because they're too old. Everyone only wants the babies." Her words took root in my mind and grew. Joseph, my husband, was not a man given to sentiment. He was a supervisor at the grain elevator, a serious man of few words, but with a bedrock of goodness beneath his quiet exterior. When I told him about adopting an older child, he just looked at me in that steady way of his, rolling a cigarette on the porch, and said, "If that's what you want, Gay, we'll go see about a child." The first time we set foot in that orphanage, my heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. It was a clean place, scoured with disinfectant, but the air was thick with a sorrow so profound it was stifling. Children ought to run, to shout, to make a glorious noise. But there, they moved like little ghosts, afraid to breathe too loud. The director, a Miss Clemens, a thin woman with a face permanently pinched as if she'd just tasted something sour, led us to her office. "Do you have a preference? Boy or girl? What age?" she asked, her voice clipped. "We want a child who truly needs a family," I said, a courage I didn't know I possessed firming my voice, one that others might have passed over. That's when she first spoke his name. "There is, Roger. He's 9. Been with us since he was 5. One of our oldest, intelligent but reserved. His mother was an addict, died of an overdose. The father is unknown." When I first laid eyes on him, he was sitting alone in a corner of the yard, an old, worn book clutched in his small hands. A skinny boy with a thatch of straight black hair and enormous dark eyes that seemed to swallow the whole world. He didn't smile when we were introduced, merely studied us with the wary intensity of a cornered animal. "He doesn't speak much," Miss Clemens explained, "but he's clever, does well in his schoolwork. He just has difficulty relating to the other children." In that moment, my heart made its decision. This boy needed a family. He needed me. Joseph, standing beside me, squeezed my hand. He had felt it too. The adoption process was a trial, as it always is. There were interviews, home visits from a stern-faced social worker, mountains of paperwork. But my determination was a force of nature. Within 4 months, Roger stood in our home with a small backpack containing his entire world, a few changes of clothes, a storybook, and an old plastic toy car. In the beginning, he was so quiet he seemed to absorb sound. He stayed in the room he shared with Paul, who was less than thrilled, but I assured him it was temporary until we could fix up the back room. At mealtimes, Roger ate with his eyes fixed on his plate, as if he feared the food would be snatched away at any moment. I tried, little by little, to bridge the distance between us. I learned he loved spaghetti with meat sauce and made it weekly. I bought him books, noticing how he cherished them. I'd sit beside him on the sofa as he watched television, and at first he would flinch when I drew near, as if bracing for a blow. It shattered my heart to see it. The first time he smiled at me was a month after he arrived. I'd baked a chocolate cake and put a single candle on it. A silly gesture, perhaps, but I wanted to mark the occasion. 1 month of our Roger being part of this family, I announced. He looked up at me with those wide, surprised eyes, and a tiny, timid smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was fleeting, but it was there. Joseph, sitting at the head of the table, saw it too and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. That night, I went to bed believing everything would be all right. We had made the right choice. Roger started at the neighborhood school. The first few months were difficult. He'd come home with torn notebooks, a black eye, scraped knees. "What happened?" I'd ask, my heart in my throat. "Nothing," he'd always murmur, eyes downcast. It was his teacher, Miss Helen, who told me the other boys tormented him, calling him an orphan, a nobody's child. The unique cruelties only children can devise. "But he doesn't react," she told me, her voice laced with concern. "He just takes it. It's not normal, Mrs. Miller. Most children cry or fight back or tell an adult. He just seems disconnected." With time, things began to change, but not in the way I had hoped. While Roger remained quiet at home, his teacher reported new problems. Explosive anger over trivialities, a broken pencil, a misplaced book. He would burst into tears for no reason or stare into the middle distance for minutes on end. I tried to talk to him, but it was like speaking to a stone wall. Joseph began to lose patience. "The boy needs structure, G. You coddle him too much." But how could I not? I looked at that thin, solemn face, at those eyes that held a weight no 9-year-old should ever have to carry, and all I could think was how to make him feel safe, how to make him feel loved. A turning point came almost a year after he'd arrived. He came home from school later than usual, the dusk settling into night. When he walked through the door, he had an ugly gash on his chin and his uniform shirt was torn. "My God, boy, what happened?" I cried, rushing to him. For the first time he erupted. He slammed his backpack onto the floor with such force that books and papers scattered across the living room. "They said you only took me in for the government money. They said nobody would really want an old boy like me." I was stunned into silence, watching this always controlled child finally unleash the storm inside him. Then, without a second thought, I wrapped my arms around him. At first, he went rigid. Then, slowly, he softened until great, heaving sobs racked his small frame. It was a cry of such profound anguish. It seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. "You are my son," I said, my voice trembling with fierce emotion. "My son of the heart. There is no government money. There is only love. You are a Miller now, and no one is ever going to take you away from us." That night felt like a breakthrough, as if a dam had broken inside him, finally allowing us in. He began to talk more at dinner, to share snippets of his school day, to ask questions about our family. Joseph, too, warmed to him, teaching him how to fix a leaky faucet, taking him fishing on the river on weekends. How wrong I was, my dear. How terribly, tragically blind we can be when we want to believe in something too much. For what I did not know then was that this was merely the prelude to a story that would grow ever darker, a story that would culminate in a single night that shattered our family forever. You see, my dear, there is a truth I've only come to understand in my old age. Sometimes love acts as a blinder. It makes us dismiss the signs, the warnings that destiny places right under our noses. By the time Roger turned 11, he had been with us for nearly 2 years. On the surface, life had found a new rhythm. He'd grown a few inches, filled out some. He was no longer the scrawny, wide-eyed boy from the orphanage. His school grades were decent, if not the excellent marks of his first months, and the teacher's notes about his behavior had ceased. He'd even made friends with two boys from the neighborhood, Tony and Mark, who would sometimes come over to play. It was around this time that our Paul married his Louise and moved to Detroit. Soon after, Margaret left to study nursing in Chicago. Suddenly, the house that had once felt so cramped was cavernously empty, occupied only by me, Joseph, and Roger. I've often wondered if that was the trigger. Seeing his siblings, however distant they had been, move on, perhaps stirring that old, familiar fear of abandonment within him. The first signs were small, strange discrepancies. Household objects would vanish and reappear in odd places. A pair of sewing scissors from the kitchen drawer would be found under his bed. A wall clock went missing for days before returning to its nail as if it had never left. Then my silver rosary, a gift from my late mother, disappeared for a full week. I turned the house upside down, even prayed to St. Anthony. Just as I'd given up hope, I found it, carefully coiled at the bottom of Roger's sock drawer. "Why did you take my rosary, son?" I asked, trying to sound stern. He looked at me with an unnerving vacancy. "I didn't. Someone must have put it there." Joseph lacked my patience. "We don't raise liars in this house, boy. If you took it, own up to it." That was the first time I saw Roger look at Joseph with pure, unadulterated anger. A hard, adult glare that was chilling on a child's face. He stormed off, slamming his bedroom door, and didn't speak to us for the rest of the day. I also noticed how much time he spent alone. For his 12th birthday, Joseph saved for months to buy him a video game console. But instead of the playful adventures other boys his age enjoyed, Roger would lock himself in his room for hours with games I didn't understand. Once I entered without knocking, a plate of snacks in my hand, and caught a glimpse of the screen, a visceral splash of pixels that looked far too violent. He shut it off the instant he saw me. "What game is that, Roger?" I asked, setting the plate down. "Nothing, Mom. Just an adventure game." I voiced my concerns to Joseph, but he dismissed them. "Boys his age like that stuff. Gee, action, fighting. You smother him. He needs to learn to be a man." Then Roger started coming home later than usual from school. He had excuses, staying late at the library, studying at a friend's house. I believed him until the day the school coordinator called. "Mrs. Miller, we're calling about Roger's absence. He hasn't been in school for 3 days. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? He leaves every morning in his uniform." "I'm sorry, but he hasn't been here. We thought he might be ill." When he sauntered in at his usual time that afternoon, I confronted him. He denied it, said it was a mistake. When I showed him the coordinator's note, his story shifted. "Some boys were bullying me. I didn't want to go." "Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped." "Because you wouldn't understand." He shouted, a raw, new anger in his voice. "You think everyone is as good as you. That's not how the world works." Joseph, arriving home at that moment, heard the shouting. When I explained, his face darkened with rage. For the first time, I saw my husband raise his hand to strike the boy, but I stepped between them. "No, Joseph. Hitting solves nothing. This boy needs discipline, Gertrude. Can't you see? He's lying to us, skipping school. God knows what else he's doing." Roger used our argument as a diversion and bolted out the front door, slamming it shut. He didn't return until the early hours of the morning, long after we'd called the police. He slipped in quietly, but I was waiting in the living room. When I turned on the lamp, I gasped. His clothes were caked in mud, a fresh scratch marred his cheek, and his eyes were dilated and wild, belonging to a stranger. "Where have you been?" I demanded, gripping his shoulders. We were sick with worry. "Around," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "I need a shower." The next day, I found a lighter and a half-empty pack of cigarettes in the pocket of his jeans while doing laundry. I cried the entire day in secret. What was happening to my boy? Where had I failed him? We entered a difficult phase. Joseph advocated for stricter punishments, the removal of privileges. I still clung to the hope of understanding, of talking it through. I even took him to a psychologist at the community center. But he sat in stony silence through all 3 sessions I managed to get him to attend. "Your son is carrying a great deal of anger, Mrs. Miller," the doctor told me afterward. Children who have experienced profound abandonment often have severe attachment issues. He may be testing you to see if you'll cast him out like his birth mother did. It made a terrible kind of sense. I resolved to have even more patience, to prove to him that our love was unconditional. Joseph reluctantly acquiesced. "You've always had a softer touch with the boys," he said in his way of admitting defeat. As Roger turned 13, adolescence descended. His voice cracked and deepened. Acne peppered his forehead, and he shot up so fast his sleeves always seemed too short. With these physical changes came a new obsession with his appearance. The boy who never cared what he wore now demanded expensive, brand-name clothes and sneakers we could scarcely afford. "Trying to impress a girl?" Joseph joked one morning, seeing Roger's hair slicked back with gel. Roger's face flushed crimson, but he said nothing. It was around this time I found the magazines, hidden beneath his mattress. Not the typical titillating magazines of teenage boys, but something darker, more extreme. When I showed them to Joseph, he shrugged. "Let the boy be. It's natural curiosity. Better this than him getting into real trouble out there." But it wasn't just the magazines. I began to feel the weight of his gaze in a way that made my skin prickle. At first, I dismissed it as the paranoia of a middle-aged woman, her body softened by childbirth and time. It couldn't be. Until the day I walked into the bathroom, the door wasn't fully closed, and found him with an old photograph of me, a youthful portrait that sat in a frame in the living room. He was so startled he dropped it, the glass shattering on the tiles. "What are you doing, Roger?" I asked, my confusion warring with a sudden cold dread. "I just thought it was a nice picture," he mumbled, then pushed past me and fled. I stood frozen, a chill tracing its way down my spine. This was not normal. Something was festering, but I couldn't bring myself to name it, not even in the privacy of my own mind. By the time Roger was 14, the situation had deteriorated. He was barely home, leaving early and returning late, his breath sometimes smelling of cigarettes, his eyes often glazed and distant. Joseph and I argued constantly. My husband wanted to lay down the law. He even spoke of sending him back. The very idea filled me with panic. "He is our son, Joseph. We don't return a child like a defective appliance." "But can't you see he's lost? He has no respect for us, for this house. What more has to happen for you to see this is out of our control?" Deep down, a part of me knew he was right, but my mother's heart, the one that had made a sacred vow, refused to surrender. That's when the money started to disappear. First, $50 from Joseph's wallet, which he wrote off as a mistake. Then, $100 from my grocery envelope. When $400 of my sister-in-law's pension money vanished from my dresser drawer, there was no more room for denial. I confronted him one afternoon. It was 1994. He was 15. The timid boy was gone, replaced by a tall, strong youth whose expression vacillated between emptiness and defiance. "Did you take Aunt Clara's money?" I asked, my voice flat. "What money?" he said, tossing his backpack on the sofa and heading to the refrigerator. "You know what money. The $400 from my drawer, Clara's pension." He turned, a soda can in his hand, and gave me a smile that froze the blood in my veins. It was cold, mocking. "And what if I did? What are you going to do about it?" I was speechless. This wasn't my Roger. It was an imposter wearing his skin. "Why? If you needed money, you could have asked. We don't have much, but we'd have found a way." "I'm not your son," he interrupted, his voice chillingly adult. "I never was. You're the one who made up this story in your head." The words were a physical blow. My legs buckled, and I had to grip the table to stay upright. Tears welled, unbidden. "Don't say that. I have loved you as a son from the first day." "Love," he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Love doesn't exist, Mommy dearest. People just use each other, just like you and Joseph used me to play the Good Samaritans, the saviors of the poor orphan boy." He brushed past me and went to his room, leaving me there, shattered. That day, I wept as I had never wept before. Joseph found me, and from my face, he knew. After I told him, he was silent for a long time, smoking on the porch. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "He needs help, Gert, the kind we can't give. Maybe we should look into an institution." "No." I screamed, desperate. "We are not abandoning him. He's confused, lost. It's his age. It will pass." Joseph shook his head, his expression grim. There's something wrong with that boy, Gertrude. Something beyond being a teenager, beyond being abandoned. There's a broken place inside him. Something that maybe all the love in the world can't fix. I couldn't sleep that night, turning over every ignored sign, every behavioral shift in my mind. Was Joseph right? What I didn't know was that in a matter of weeks, I would have my answer in the most horrific way imaginable. The winter of 1994 sealed our fate. Roger, at 15, had the body of a man, but a mind that was increasingly foreign to me. There were still days of heartbreaking normalcy, where he was the affectionate boy from the orphanage, asking for a blessing, helping Joseph with chores. In those hours, hope would bloom in my chest, but they were invariably followed by the other days, the days when his eyes were hollow, his walk a prowl, his temper a lit fuse. He'd slam doors, break things. Once he hurled his dinner plate against the wall because I asked him to turn his music down. "What is happening to you?" I sobbed, cleaning the mess. "Nothing you would understand," was his constant, infuriating refrain. Then I saw the marks on his arms. I told myself they were from fights. But one afternoon I pushed open his unlocked door with a stack of clean laundry and saw him, syringe in hand, injecting something into a vein. I stood paralyzed, the clothes tumbling from my arms. He whirled around, shock melting into fury. "Get out!" he roared. I fled to my room, locked the door, and called Joseph. My husband came home immediately. By then, Roger had gone, taking his backpack. We sat in the devastated silence of our kitchen. "Rehab, G," Joseph said, rubbing his face. "It's gone too far. He's using in our house." I still tried to defend him, to invent excuses. A vitamin shot, anything but the truth I knew in my gut. My son was an addict. He returned 2 days later, a specter of his former self, gaunt, shadowed, shivering in the summer heat. Joseph sat him down at the kitchen table. For the first time, I saw my husband cry. "Look what you're doing to yourself, son. Look what you're doing to your mother." For a fleeting second, something like shame flickered in Roger's eyes. Then it was gone. "You don't understand," he mumbled. "Then make us understand," I pleaded, taking his ice-cold, dirty hands in mine. "When did this start? Why?" He was silent for a long time. "You think you know me, but you don't. No one does." "Then tell us," Joseph insisted. "We're your family. We want to help." Roger lifted his gaze, and in it I saw a terrifying mix of rage and pleasure at our pain. "Family," he snorted. "This isn't a family. It's an arrangement of convenience. You wanted a child to replace the ones who left, and I needed a roof." "That's not true," Joseph's voice was steel. "You are our son, and that is why tomorrow I am taking you to get help." "I'm not going anywhere," Roger yelled, knocking over his chair. "You don't control me. You're not my real parents." He stormed out, the front door shuddering in its frame. Joseph gave chase, but he had vanished into the night. We decided then that when he returned, we would have him committed, by force if necessary. But he didn't return. For a week, there was no word. We scoured the town, hospitals, police stations, the shanty town under the bridge. Nothing. The guilt was a physical ache. Where had I failed? Nearly 2 weeks later, a knock came at the door. It was Roger, but barely recognizable. He had aged a decade, was emaciated, clothes in tatters, a fresh cut over his eyebrow. But his eyes were the worst, glazed and utterly lost. "Son," I cried, catching him as he collapsed into my arms. He could barely stand. Joseph helped me carry him to the sofa. He was burning with fever, racked with tremors. I wanted to call an ambulance, but Joseph feared the police. "We'll care for him here," he said, his voice grim. I nursed him through the night, through the vomiting and the convulsions. In the depths of his fever, he hallucinated, calling for his real mother, screaming for someone to stop hitting him, weeping like the small child he once was. In his delirium, I heard fragments of a past more horrific than I had ever imagined. Names, places, abuses. My heart broke anew with each whispered confession. By morning, the fever had broken. He woke, confused, his eyes finding me in the chair beside him. "Mom," he whispered, his voice that of the 9-year-old boy again. "You're still here." "I'll always be here, son," I said, clutching his rough hand. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know, son, I know. But we're going to help you now. Everything will be all right." How naively, tragically wrong I was. That moment of lucidity was merely the eye of the hurricane. For the following days, we tended to him at home. The withdrawal was a brutal spectacle of sweat, shakes, and agony. Slowly he improved, and with his physical health, his demeanor softened. He was the old Roger again, apologetic, grateful, making promises of reform. We, in our desperate hope, believed him. Joseph returned to work, and for a few weeks in early October, a fragile peace descended. Roger went to school, came home on time, even helped around the house. We began to dream of a future for him again, of technical school, of a normal life. One night we were having dinner, the three of us, a scene of domestic tranquility I hadn't dared hope for. It was then Roger chose to speak. "Mom, Dad, you always wanted to know why I started." Joseph and I grew still. "Only if you want to tell us, son," I said carefully. "I need to," he said, drawing a shaky breath. "It's about my real mother, the one who died of an overdose. That was a lie the orphanage told. My mother abandoned me when I was 4, left me on a church step with a note. I never knew why." The confession hung in the air. After that, I was passed around. Foster homes, orphanages. In one, there was a man, an attendant. He stopped, swallowing hard. He did things, bad things to the children. Joseph put down his fork, his face a mask of fury. I felt a wave of nausea. "That's why when you took me in, I couldn't trust it. I couldn't believe you'd want me, just to want me. Then at school, I met some older boys. They gave me the stuff, said it would make the memories go away. And for a while, it did." I rose and wrapped my arms around him, and Joseph placed a firm hand on his shoulder. It felt finally like we had broken through to the core of his pain. "We'll get through this, son," I promised, "together as a family." That night, I lay beside Joseph, my heart swelling with a fragile hope. "He opened his heart to us," I whispered. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "I hope you're right, G, but there's still a shadow in his eyes that worries me." "It's the trauma, Joseph. He'll heal. You'll see." I fell asleep on my husband's chest, enveloped in a peace I hadn't known in years. It was the last peaceful night I would ever know. It was the end of October, a Thursday heavy with the promise of a storm. Roger had been to school, had dinner with us. Joseph mentioned he had to leave early the next morning for a shipment. I saw a strange, unreadable look pass over Roger's face, but thought nothing of it. We went about our nightly rituals. Joseph fell asleep quickly. I said my rosary, grateful for the turnaround, and drifted off to the sound of rain lashing the windows. I don't know what woke me. Perhaps a shift in the air, a subconscious warning. It was the dead of night. The rain had ceased, leaving a damp, heavy silence. I opened my eyes to the sense of a presence in the room. My first, terrified thought was an intruder. Then the shadow moved closer, and my heart stopped. It was Roger. He was standing beside my bed, looking down at me with an expression I will carry to my grave. It was not my son's face. It was the face of a predator, cold, empty, and terrifyingly intense. "Roger," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you sick?" He didn't answer. His eyes traveled over me, and that's when I saw it. The physical evidence of an arousal no mother should ever witness on her child. "What are you doing?" I gasped, trying to sit up. With a swift, brutal movement, he clamped a hand over my mouth, his weight pinning me to the mattress. "Don't wake Joseph," he hissed. "I don't want to hurt him." The terror was absolute. This was my child, the boy I had sung to sleep, whose wounds I had kissed. I struggled, but he was impossibly strong. "I've wanted this," he whispered, his breath hot in my ear. "Since the first day. You never noticed how I watched you." I wept soundlessly, my eyes pleading with him, trying to find the boy I loved behind the monster's mask. Just as he began to tear at my nightgown, Joseph stirred. "What in God's name?" he roared, bolting upright. Roger turned, startled but not retreating. It was as if the last thread of his humanity snapped. "Get off of her," Joseph bellowed, launching himself at our son. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and fury. The bedside lamp shattered. I fumbled for the light, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The scene that flooded the room was one from a nightmare. My husband and my son, locked in a vicious struggle. "Call the police," Joseph grunted, trying to restrain Roger's flailing arms. "Gertrude, go!" But I was frozen, a statue of shock. With a surge of strength, Roger broke free. His hand closed around the broken base of the lamp. Before I could scream, he brought it down on Joseph's head. My husband crumpled, a line of blood snaking down his temple. He was dazed, helpless. Roger stood over him, panting, then turned his wild gaze to me. A smile, utterly devoid of humanity, twisted his lips. See what you made me do? If you had just been quiet, none of this would have happened. In that moment, a primal instinct for survival overrode my paralysis. I scrambled from the bed, darted past him, and fled down the hallway. "Help!" I screamed, my voice a ragged shriek. "Somebody help us!" He stumbled after me in the dark, but I made it to the front door, my fumbling fingers finding the lock. I burst out into the cold, damp night, still in my nightdress, screaming into the darkness. It was our neighbor, Mr. Arnold, who responded first, then others. Soon a small crowd had gathered. "My son, my husband, please, the police." Mr. Arnold and his son, a burly security guard, ran toward our house. Roger was gone. He had vaulted the back fence. They found Joseph sitting on the sofa, pressing a cloth to his bleeding head, ashen and trembling. The police took their time. Sheriff Oswald, who had known Roger as a quiet boy, was visibly shaken by our story. "How do you explain that your own son attempted to violate you, then assaulted his father?" The words stuck in my throat, too horrific to speak aloud. They searched for Roger, but he had vanished. Joseph got stitches. We were given sedatives. Returning home was like walking into a crime scene, which it was. The physical wreckage was bad enough, but the emotional devastation was absolute. Our home, our sanctuary was desecrated. Our family was in ruins. For days, we jumped at every sound. Joseph, my rock, was broken. The failure haunted him. "I should have seen it, G. I should have protected you." 3 days later, Sheriff Oswald called. We found Roger. My heart lurched, that damned, persistent maternal instinct flaring. "Is he all right?" "He's alive, Mrs. Miller, but he's not well. We found him in a squat near the rail yards. He'd taken a massive dose of something. It looks like he tried to end his life. Despite everything, he was still my son. We've taken him to the hospital. From there, he'll be transferred to the psychiatric facility in Grand Rapids. The doctors, they believe he has serious mental illnesses, beyond the drugs. We visited him in the hospital. He was restrained, sedated, a hollowed-out shell. I held his limp, cold hand and wept. Why, son? Why? There was no answer. The doctors diagnosed him schizophrenia, antisocial personality disorder, compounded by severe addiction. These conditions were likely present, latent, when you adopted him, one young, weary doctor explained. The trauma and the drugs acted as an accelerant. The last time we saw him, in the stark, peeling-walled psychiatric hospital, he was almost unrecognizable. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a flat monotone. "We came to see you," Joseph said, keeping his distance. "It's too late for that now, don't you think?" Roger said, a dry, humorless laugh escaping him. We never saw him again. He was transferred to a secure custodial hospital for the criminally insane. The judge ruled he would remain there indefinitely. Joseph and I tried to piece our lives back together, but the cracks were too deep. He died in 2003, a part of him having died that night in 1994. As for Roger, I receive occasional updates. He remains institutionalized. He has periods of stability, but he will never be free. I have not visited him. I forgave him in the sense that I released the hatred, understanding he was profoundly ill. But I could not forget, and I could not trust. Now at 76, sitting on this old porch, watching the eternal flow of the Grand River, I understand a few hard-won truths. Love is not a cure-all. Some brokenness is too fundamental. Instinct is a language we must learn to heed, and forgiveness does not require reconciliation. My story is a testament to a love that fought a war on two fronts, against the demons in my son and against my own refusal to see them for what they were. It is a story I tell so that others might see the signs before the storm breaks and understand that setting a boundary is not the same as abandoning hope.